The Big O, the legend Oscar Robertson, with a call to action for white athletes to step up on social issues after receiving the Lifetime Achievement Award last night, saying it's not a black issue, but a social injustice issue, urging white and black players to come together. And Max, we could argue the breakthrough in the civil rights movement happened when when both white and black folks were fighting together against segregation. Do you think white players should feel obligated to speak up on these social issues?
I think people should. And so it depends on the white player. You can have as a group white people, but they fall into subgroups. People who are socially conscious, people who aren't, people who are against civil rights. Now, it's a little bit unfair to say white people aren't this like monolith, because they certainly voted like one in the last election. But nevertheless, they're not. People are individuals. Should some white players be standing up? Yes, and I can give you some names who I'd like to see stand up too. I mentioned last year, a white player should at least do a Pee Wee Reese. Put his arm around a black player, as Pee Wee Reese did to Jackie Robinson. Pee Wee Reese, very popular shortstop for the Brooklyn Dodgers. They win the World Series every year. Jackie Robinson comes up, first African-American player in Major League Baseball, and he's given a hard time by racist fans and others. And Pee Wee Reese put his arm around him, saying, he's with me. You got a problem with him, you got a problem with me. And I was saying, whether or not a white player agrees with or wants to protest and do the protest during the anthem, at least put your arm around a black teammate, right? And Chris Long did it the next day. He is, in Yiddish, mensch means a human being in the best sense of the word. That's a mensch.
He donated his whole salary also.
He's a mensch. But that's raised right. But that's not a quarterback. That's not a guy at the highest level. I mean, Tom Brady, for example, has shown just uncanny maturity and leadership ability in terms of the things he finds important, which, to my view, from where I'm sitting, look like his family. The way he's handled the incident at the radio where his kid was like an adult and a leader, and his team. About those two things, he's mature. He's a mature leader. Well, what about these other issues? Does he think something's going on? And if he does he have the kind of social consciousness to do something about it? Look, I'm not from south of the border, Stephen A., but do I need to be to understand that it is a crime against humanity to even carry out orders if a government policy is to separate families at the border, children from their parents? No, I don't need to be from south of the border to know that makes you a war criminal. No, I don't need to, someone who is committing a crime against humanity. I don't need to be south of the border to know that. I don't need to be black to understand the history of this country is such that there is still social inequity based on our country's original sin. And we don't need to go through the whole history. You have to be living under a rock not to know that. So I'm not saying every white player. I'm not even suggesting the level of activism that they need to show. Some of them don't want to be activists, but none of them, or so few, particularly in positions of leadership, none of them have that kind of social consciousness that tells them, I need to stand up and say something, do something. Oh, I think that the white players are severely underrepresented in this cause.
Well, first of all, I appreciate you saying that, and I applaud you for it, and I thank you for it. Obviously, I agree with every word that you just said, and I also agree with Oscar Robertson. But for the purposes of this discussion, let me also say that even though I completely agree with Oscar Robertson, it's not as simple as he's making it out to be. And as a black man, recognizing the issues that we face in this country and the trials and tribulations that we have to endure, obviously there's a heightened level of sensitivity. And when you look at Oscar Robertson fighting the fight that he fought back in the day, because you're talking about free agency and players having the right to move in the way that they've benefited from it. We know what role that he has played. And it was great to see him receive that Lifetime Achievement Award because he's worthy of it. But one of the things that our community, my community, has to pay attention to is when we want others to step up, as you would say, and you talk about the underrepresentation that emanates from the white community. While it does need to be elevated, we also have a responsibility to have a plan, to invite somebody in or to feel like they're compelled or obligated to ingratiate themselves into our cause. Well, what's your plan of action? Do you have a plan of action? How's it going to be executed? What is the end result? To just ask people to step up and step forward when no plan is in place, that's a problem, because ultimately the ends may not outweigh the means. And that's what has to happen. When you're asking somebody to get involved, let's think about the National Football League for a second here. I want to remind everybody, Colin Kaepernick's protest was not against the National Football League. We keep forgetting that. It was against society. We're looking at society as a whole, what's transpiring in our society. Carmelo Anthony and Lala Anthony are in the news today because they decided, being the heartfelt individuals that they are, to attend this young man's funeral because it was a false identity slaying on his part. Gang members just used a machete and just tortured the kid and killed him. And hundreds of people flummoxed to the Bronx to show up in support of his family, and obviously it's something that everybody wants to lament. We look at something like that. Those are the kind of things that have been transpiring in our society: crime, police brutality, relationships with law enforcement communities, with minority communities. All of those things have been addressed and continue to need to be addressed. The flip side to it, however, is when the NFL is suffering and their bottom line is suffering, and you're talking about individuals' quality of lives that are going to be affected if they indeed get involved. The question that you have to ask is, what am I doing this for? We have to have an answer. And I don't mean literally the purpose. I'm talking about the ultimate result. What are we trying to accomplish here, and what is in place that's going to facilitate the right accomplishments being had?